Jimin's voice went soft when Jungkook was hurt. Fans noticed what he said loudly, crying face red heart #fire. The moment was frozen in chaos. Jungkook stumbled backward, a sharp wince crossing his usually stoic face, and the sharp crack of his ankle hitting the uneven pavement echoed like a gunshot in the deserted alley. Jimin's eyes went wide, pupils dilating, his heart hammering against his ribs as if it had suddenly forgotten its rhythm. Jungkook. Jimin's voice cracked, softer than a whisper, trembling on the edge of panic, almost as if he were afraid to make a sound loud enough to shatter reality itself. He ran forward, boots scraping against the wet asphalt, the smell of rain-drenched concrete and gasoline stinging his nostrils. Jungkook clutched his ankle, a thin line of pain cutting across his usually unshakable composure. His lips quivered, fighting against the surge of frustration and vulnerability he never allowed anyone to see. "It's nothing," he hissed, but his voice betrayed him, high and strained, almost like a child's cry muffled by pride. Jimin crouched beside him, hands trembling as they hovered over Jungkook's injury, reluctant to touch, afraid of worsening it. "It's not nothing, you idiot," Jimin murmured, his voice softening to a tender timbre that made Jungkook's chest tighten with a mixture of embarrassment and relief. The warmth in Jimin's words was undeniable, a lifeline amidst the chaos. The alley was empty, shadows stretching across the cracked walls like silent spectators to their struggle. Every drop of rain that splashed on their hair felt electrified, a pulse that mirrored Jimin's own quickened heartbeat. His fingers finally brushed against Jungkook's ankle, careful, delicate, tracing the outline of the swelling that had appeared too fast, too viciously. "You're bleeding," Jimin said quietly, almost as if admitting it would fracture him too. He caught Jungkook's gaze and saw the storm behind the other's eyes, pride, pain, and a flicker of fear Jimin had never allowed himself to acknowledge before. Jungkook tried to mask it with a stubborn tilt of his chin, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. Jimin noticed it all, the way he flinched at the cold wind, the barely audible hiss as his ankle throbbed, the tension that wrapped around his muscles like barbed wire. And something inside Jimin broke a little, a quiet surrender to the rawness of the moment. "I've got you," Jimin whispered, almost inaudible over the patter of rain. "I'm not letting go. Not now, not ever." His voice had changed, soft, protective, almost painfully intimate. It was a tone that Jungkook hadn't heard directed at him before, a tone that made the edges of the world shrink until it was just the two of them, soaked and trembling, amid the endless grey drizzle. Jungkook's breath hitched, the sound catching Jimin in its gravity. The alley felt smaller now, the air denser, every heartbeat amplified. He wanted to look away, to mask the vulnerability that came so easily when Jimin's presence filled the space, but he couldn't. Not when Jimin's gaze was unwavering, filled with a warmth that pierced through the sting of pain and cold rain. "Please, be careful next time," Jimin added softly, almost pleading, though his hands still hovered protectively over Jungkook. There was a raw intensity in his tone, a layered emotion that combined fear, frustration, and a tender concern that Jungkook had never fully realized he could inspire. Jungkook swallowed hard, eyes glistening. You don't have to worry," he whispered, voice rough but betraying the storm inside. Yet the tight line of his jaw, the way his hands clenched against the wet asphalt, betrayed him more than words ever could. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, the world narrowed to shared breaths and the rain's rhythmic tapping. Jimin's gaze never faltered, unwavering and almost unbearably earnest. Finally, he let his hand rest gently over Jungkook's, a grounding touch, and murmured, I can't just watch you hurt yourself like that. Not ever." Jungkook's chest tightened, warmth blooming where the cold had once seemed to dominate. The vulnerability in Jimin's voice, the softness, the careful intensity, cut through the fog of pain and self-restraint Jungkook carried like armor. And though he would never admit it aloud, he realized in that moment that he had never wanted anyone to notice him this much, not even himself. The rain continued to fall, a quiet symphony to the unspoken confessions threading between them, and for the first time that night, Jungkook let himself lean slightly into Jimin's presence, just enough to feel the stability, the gravity, the undeniable pull of someone who wouldn't let go no matter what. And Jimin, voice still soft, eyes unwavering, promised silently through every tremor of his hand and every heartbeat, that he never would. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and fear, sharp and almost suffocating as Jungkook's ankle throbbed beneath the sterile white bandages. The hospital lights flickered faintly, casting long, hesitant shadows along the walls. Jimin followed closely behind, boots echoing softly against the linoleum floor, his gaze never leaving Jungkook's stooped figure. There was a tension in the air, taut like a violin string about to snap, and every step carried a weight neither of them could ignore. "You're walking too fast," Jimin said finally, voice low and strained, the kind of whisper that vibrated with concern and something more dangerous, something raw that clung to the edges of his tone. He reached out, fingers brushing against Jungkook's elbow, not enough to restrain him, just enough to anchor himself to the presence that set his heart racing. "I'm fine," Jungkook snapped, sharper than intended. His words cut the quiet air, and Jimin flinched slightly, though he didn't pull back. "I don't need help," he added, the tension in his jaw betraying how much he actually did. Jimin's lips pressed together, his voice dropping another notch, soft, almost intimate. "You're lying. And you know it." The heat in his words wasn't anger. It was desperation, vulnerability threaded with fear he refused to admit out loud. He stepped closer, breath-catching, his gaze locking with Jungkook's in a way that felt like it could burn the skin. Jungkook swallowed, throat tight, trying to mask the flutter in his chest. The air between them was charged, thick, every unspoken word carrying the weight of months of suppressed emotions, fragile trust, and dangerous desire. He wanted to snap, to push Jimin away and hide behind his pride, but the intensity in Jimin's gaze made that impossible. "You can't pretend I don't see it," Jimin said, voice dropping to a whisper that almost grazed Jungkook's ear. "The way you flinch, the way you tighten up. I see it all. And I can't." His words faltered, lips trembling, and the tension in his chest was palpable. "I can't stand watching you hurt like that." Jungkook's resolve crumbled, just a fraction, just enough for his eyes to glisten under the harsh hospital lights. I didn't want you to worry," he admitted, voice barely audible, choked with emotion. The confession felt like admitting to a crime, yet it carried the intimacy of a secret shared only between them, fragile and tremulous. Jimin's hand grazed Jungkook's shoulder this time, firmer, grounding. "I don't care," he said, sharp and soft all at once. "I care. Always. And I will, if you let me, I will protect you. From everything." There was fire behind his words, a heat that wasn't just anger or fear, it was something deeper, raw, unfiltered. For a long moment, they just stood there, the world outside the sterile hospital walls fading into silence. Jungkook wanted to pull away, to reclaim his composure, but Jimin's presence was magnetic, undeniable, like a current that pulled against every defense he had built over the years. "I hate that I need you," Jungkook confessed finally, his voice tight with emotion, vulnerable in a way he'd never allowed anyone to see. His fingers twitched at his sides, hesitant, unsure, betraying the turmoil within. "I hate that I rely on you, but I do." Jimin's lips curved into the faintest, almost imperceptible smile, and his voice softened even further, almost tenderly. "You don't hate it," he murmured, stepping closer, letting the warmth of his body brush against Jungkook's. The proximity was electrifying, a magnetic tension that made every nerve sing. "You just pretend you do." Jungkook's chest tightened, the truth hitting harder than any physical pain. He swallowed, eyes darting, trying to focus, trying to breathe, but Jimin's voice, soft yet piercing, was a tether pulling him unrelentingly toward confession, toward surrender. "I can't lie to you," he admitted finally, voice breaking. "Not anymore." The words fell into the silence between them, heavy and resonant, a declaration that shook the boundaries they had both struggled to maintain. Jimin's hand found Jungkook's, lingering, tentative, then firm, as if sealing a promise that no words could fully contain. "Then don't," Jimin whispered, his voice trembling slightly but steady in intent. "Don't ever. I'll handle it. Every time. I swear it." And in that sterile hallway, amid the smell of antiseptic and the hum of fluorescent lights, Jungkook let himself lean just a little closer, feeling the solidity of Jimin's presence, the fire in his gaze, the weight of his words. The world outside could wait. The chaos could wait. All that mattered was the fragile, pulsing connection between them, a dangerous, beautiful, uncontrollable tether of fear, desire, and trust. A nurse passed by, oblivious to the storm of emotion that crackled between the two, but Jimin didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He only held Jungkook's hand a little tighter, his thumb brushing over the back of Jungkook's fingers in a slow, deliberate rhythm. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes: protection, devotion, and a heat that neither of them could deny. I can't believe you care this much, Jungkook admitted finally, voice low, almost a whisper. His eyes searched Jimin's face, looking for truth, for reassurance, for anything to anchor him amidst the tumult of his own heart. I don't just care, Jimin replied, voice trembling, soft and intimate, his forehead lightly resting against Jungkook's temple. I need you to know. I can't, won't let anything happen to you. Ever. Jungkook's breath hitched. The admission, the softness, the intensity, it all hit harder than any pain in his body. And though he had tried, over and over, to armor himself against emotions, against vulnerability, against Jimin, it was impossible now. He had no choice. He leaned into Jimin's touch, letting the storm of feeling sweep him away, knowing, with a terrifying clarity, that he had crossed a line he would never return from, and he didn't want to. The rain outside had stopped, but the air remained thick and electric, clinging to the city like a secret waiting to explode. Jungkook limped through the dimly lit streets, each step careful, each breath uneven, and Jimin stayed close, matching his pace without hesitation. The neon lights of the shops reflected off the wet asphalt, creating streaks of color that danced in their eyes, but neither of them seemed to notice. Their focus was entirely on each other, on the fragile tether of connection that had grown far too intense, far too fast to ignore. You're bleeding again, Jimin muttered, voice low, almost rough with suppressed panic, as he crouched down to examine the small gash along Jungkook's hand. The cut was minor, but the anger in Jimin's tone made it seem like Jungkook had been shot. His fingers hovered over the wound, trembling just slightly, betraying the restraint he was trying so hard to maintain. It's nothing, Jungkook snapped, voice sharper than he intended. His pride flared, a protective barrier over the vulnerability he couldn't yet admit. But even as he said it, his eyes betrayed him, glossy, betraying the sting of pain and the uncertainty that had begun to settle in his chest. You're lying again, Jimin whispered, softer now, dangerously close, his face just inches from Jungkook's. The softness in his voice made Jungkook's chest tighten, his breath catching in ways that scared him. There was an intensity in Jimin's gaze that made him feel exposed, naked in ways no one had ever seen him. Stop pretending you can handle everything alone. I can't stand it. Jungkook's jaw tightened. He wanted to look away, to mask the storm that roared inside him, but he couldn't. Jimin's presence pulled at something he had spent years burying: fear, longing, and the dizzying pull of desire. He started, then stopped, swallowing hard, frustrated at the vulnerability slipping through his fingers. You just what? Jimin pressed, his voice a low rumble, soft yet scorching with heat. He brushed a wet strand of hair from Jungkook's forehead, fingers lingering far too long, and Jungkook's entire body betrayed him, shivering at the unexpected intimacy. Say it. I'll listen. I always do. Jungkook's gaze dropped, ashamed, conflicted. The street around them felt impossibly small, the neon reflections like confessions flashing across his mind. I don't want to hurt you, he admitted finally, voice breaking. But I can't hide how much it affects me when you look at me like that. His words hung in the air, fragile, trembling, vulnerable, and Jimin's heart twisted painfully at the raw honesty. You think I'm afraid of seeing the real you? Jimin said, voice softer now, a gentle growl underlining the tenderness. He reached out, cupping Jungkook's face, thumb brushing over the damp skin with careful reverence. I've always wanted this, the truth, everything. Don't you see? I don't just see your strength, I see your cracks. And I want them all. Every single one. Jungkook's chest tightened, the confession like a spark setting dry leaves alight inside him. His lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, Jimin leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper that trembled with heat and emotion. Don't fight me. Not this time. Let me in. Let me see all of you, Jungkook. The world seemed to shatter around them, the city fading to grey shadows as every heartbeat, every breath, became a pulsing symphony of tension. Jungkook wanted to resist, wanted to hide behind the pride that had always protected him, but the softness in Jimin's eyes, the raw intensity in his voice, the heat that pressed against him, it was irresistible. Jungkook choked, struggling against the tempest inside him. He wanted to run, wanted to deny it all, but the pull was undeniable. His hand brushed against Jimin's chest, almost accidentally, almost tender, and Jimin's eyes flickered with a heat that made Jungkook's pulse slam violently against his ribs. "I need you too," he admitted, voice raw, unsteady, filled with a vulnerability that left him trembling. Jimin's lips curved, soft, almost predatory, his hand tightening around Jungkook's. "Finally," he murmured, voice breaking with a mixture of relief and something darker, something that made Jungkook's stomach coil with anticipation. "I've been waiting for you to say that. Waiting for you to let me in." The distance between them disappeared in an instant, a shared breath, a lingering touch that ignited a storm neither of them could tame. Their bodies moved closer, the heat between them building, suffocating, raw. Jimin's voice, soft yet fierce, carried against Jungkook's ear, words meant only for him. "I won't let anything hurt you. Not ever. Not me. Not anyone. You belong to me tonight, and I'll protect you from every damn thing in this world." Jungkook shivered, leaning into the intensity, surrendering against every instinct screaming at him to pull back. The streets around them blurred, the neon lights bleeding together, leaving only the searing proximity, the rapid thumping of two hearts tangled in a storm of fear, longing, and desire. "I don't want to be alone," Jungkook whispered finally, voice breaking, a raw confession laid bare under the intimacy of Jimin's gaze. "Not tonight. Not with anyone." Jimin's lips brushed against Jungkook's temple in a soft, reverent gesture, his breath hot against his skin. "Then you won't be," he murmured, his voice trembling with an intensity that made every nerve ignite. "Not ever. Not while I'm here. You're mine, Jungkook. Mine, and I'll fight for you until the last breath leaves me." The world outside ceased to exist. Rain-soaked streets, neon reflections, distant car horns all faded into irrelevance as the heat between them burned unchecked. Jungkook finally allowed himself to lean fully into Jimin's warmth, letting the tension, the fear, the longing dissolve in a single, exquisite surrender, and Jimin, voice soft, eyes filled with unspoken promises and ferocious devotion, held him close, whispering over and over, "I've got you. I've always got you." The night had fallen heavy over the city, thick with a humidity that clung to skin and clothes, pressing down like an unspoken warning. Jungkook leaned against the cold brick of the rooftop, one hand pressed to his ankle, the other brushing through damp strands of hair plastered to his forehead. His chest rose and fell unevenly, and Jimin hovered close, eyes sharp, gaze like fire yet filled with a tenderness that made Jungkook's pulse thrum erratically. "You shouldn't have pushed yourself like that," Jimin said, voice low, almost harsh, but tremors of worry betrayed the intensity beneath. His fingers brushed against Jungkook's arm, careful but lingering, a friction that left heat crawling under Jungkook's skin. "I told you to rest, but you," he trailed off, jaw tightening, frustration and fear mingling in the cadence of his words. I couldn't," Jungkook admitted, voice strained, hiding both exhaustion and shame. "There's too much at stake." His lips pressed into a thin line, a mixture of pride and stubbornness. "I can't. I won't be weak in front of everyone." Jimin stepped closer, the gap between them narrowing, the air charged, thick with tension. "You think this is weakness?" His voice dropped, rougher now, heat layered with an emotion that made Jungkook's knees weaken in more ways than one. "Pain isn't weakness. Pretending to be untouchable while breaking inside, that's reckless. That's dangerous." Jungkook's breath hitched. The words struck too close, too accurately. His pride, his desire to be untouchable, clashed violently with the need he had never admitted aloud to lean on someone, to be seen in his cracks. The neon lights reflected off the glass of nearby buildings, streaking across their faces like confession, illumination of vulnerability. "Care too much," Jungkook muttered, voice rough, almost defensive, but the heat creeping up his neck betrayed him. His gaze flicked away, searching the city skyline, yet unable to hide from the intensity radiating from Jimin. "I care enough to be furious at you," Jimin replied sharply, stepping closer until their shoulders brushed, a spark igniting between them. His hand hovering near Jungkook's, trembling slightly before resting on his hip, anchoring him with a possessiveness that sent a shiver down Jungkook's spine. "Enough to tell you that you don't get to hurt yourself and pretend I won't notice." Jungkook's lips parted, a gasp escaping as the tension mounted. "Jimin, you don't understand," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, but his body betrayed him, leaning slightly into the warmth of Jimin's hand, seeking what he couldn't admit he desperately needed. "I understand more than you think," Jimin countered, voice dropping to a husky whisper that grazed Jungkook's ear. "I understand the pride, the fear, the need to control everything. But you don't get to carry that alone. Not with me. Not ever." His fingers brushed the side of Jungkook's face, soft yet insistent, and Jungkook's breath hitched at the proximity. For a moment, the city fell away entirely. All that remained was the heat between them, the tremor of restrained desire, and the raw intensity of emotions laid bare. Jimin's eyes held Jungkook's with an insistence that was almost painful, almost impossible to resist. "Look at me," Jimin demanded softly, a command layered with care and something hotter, fiercer. "See that I'm here. That I won't let go." Jungkook's chest tightened, a rush of emotions spilling through him, fear and longing and an ache he had tried to ignore for years. He met Jimin's gaze, finally, fully, letting the storm inside him rise and spill. I don't want to be alone," he confessed, voice breaking, raw. "Not tonight. Not ever when you're here." Jimin's lips curved into a small, almost feral smile, his voice dropping to a whisper that made every nerve ignite. "Good. Because I'm not going anywhere. Not while you need me. And even when you think you don't." His hand moved, tracing Jungkook's jawline, brushing damp strands of hair away, lingering over every tremor, every flinch. "You're mine, Jungkook. And I'll prove it. Every time." The tension escalated further as Jimin's body pressed closer, heat radiating, his voice dropping to husky murmurs, each word a claim, a confession, an undeniable pull that left Jungkook reeling. "You think you can push me away, but you can't. You'll never be able to hide from me. And you don't want to. Admit it." Jungkook swallowed hard, throat tight, heart hammering violently in his chest. The vulnerability, the tension, the undeniable heat, they wrapped around him like a vice. His voice was barely audible, trembling with a mixture of fear and desire. I can't. I don't." Jimin's lips brushed his temple, hot, close, and his whisper hit every pulse in Jungkook's body. "You can. You can with me. You can tell me everything. Fear, weakness, desire, I'll take it all. And I'll make sure you're safe. Even if it destroys me." Jungkook's knees buckled slightly, and Jimin's arms were there instantly, steady, strong, possessive, holding him close, heat against heat. Their breaths mingled, hearts thrumming in tandem, every nerve screaming with the tension of unspoken confessions, forbidden desire, and an intimacy that was both terrifying and irresistible. "You're insane," Jungkook whispered, voice breaking with both exasperation and awe, leaning fully into Jimin's chest, letting himself be anchored, letting the storm finally wash over him. "And you love it," Jimin murmured back, voice low, soft, but edged with something feral. "Don't deny it. You can't. And I won't let you." His fingers threaded through Jungkook's hair, thumb tracing the line of his jaw, anchoring them together against a world that had no right to witness what was happening, yet couldn't tear them apart. For a long moment, they stayed like that, the cityscape behind them blurred, irrelevant. Rain had stopped, neon lights bled into the night, but all that mattered was the heat between them, the raw, dangerous connection that neither could deny, and the promises unspoken, whispered in trembling voices and fiery, desperate touches. The night air was heavy, almost suffocating, as Jungkook and Jimin stood on the rooftop, the city sprawling endlessly beneath them. The neon lights reflected off the wet pavement far below, but up here, in their own suspended world, there was nothing but the raw pulse of emotion between them. Jungkook's ankle was wrapped securely now, but it didn't matter, pain and fear had become irrelevant next to the storm that had built between them over weeks of tension, longing, and unspoken truths. Jimin's hand lingered on Jungkook's waist, fingers threading into the fabric of his shirt, anchoring him, claiming him. "You don't understand what you do to me," Jimin murmured, voice low, husky, trembling with emotion. "Every time you push me away, every time you try to be untouchable. I feel it all. And I can't stop myself. I don't want to stop myself." Jungkook's chest heaved, a mixture of relief, fear, and desire crashing over him. I don't know how to do this," he admitted, voice breaking, eyes glistening under the neon glow. I've never let anyone in like this. Not really. Not like you. Jimin pressed his forehead against Jungkook's, breath mingling, warm and urgent. Then let me lead, he whispered. Let me show you it's okay to feel. It's okay to be weak, to lean, to want. I'll catch you every time. His hand cupped Jungkook's face, thumb brushing over his cheek, tracing the faint traces of tears. I'll always catch you. Jungkook closed his eyes, surrendering fully for the first time, letting the weight of the last weeks, the fear, the longing, fall away. His hand moved instinctively, resting over Jimin's heart, feeling the steady rhythm that matched his own erratic heartbeat. I trust you, he whispered, a tremor of vulnerability threading through the words. Jimin's lips curved into the smallest, most tender smile, eyes shining with unshed emotion. That's all I need, he said softly. Your trust, nothing else. And I'll guard it, guard you, everything about you, forever if I can. The wind whipped around them, tossing their damp hair, carrying the distant sounds of the city into their private world. The tension that had built for weeks, the pain, the fear, the desire, shifted into something calmer, something grounding. Not a resolution of every struggle, not the end of their battles with pride, trauma, or the outside world, but an acknowledgement that they would face it together, unflinchingly, as partners, as equals, as something far more intense than mere friendship or obligation. Jungkook opened his eyes, looking at Jimin with a quiet intensity, the kind that held both gratitude and need. I don't ever want to feel alone again, he admitted, voice raw but steady, carrying the weight of the promise he was making to himself as much as to Jimin. You won't, Jimin said, voice soft but unwavering, a vow as much as a declaration. He leaned in, brushing his lips against Jungkook's temple in a soft, reverent gesture that carried everything unspoken between them: protection, desire, love, and the kind of devotion that seared into memory. Not ever. I'm yours, and you're mine. And that's enough. The city continued its restless hum below, oblivious to the quiet storm that had settled above it. Rain had stopped, the neon lights reflected like shards of memory on the wet asphalt, but the two of them were no longer tethered to the world outside. They were tethered to each other, to the heat, to the softness, to the fire and vulnerability that had always defined them. Jungkook exhaled slowly, leaning fully into Jimin, letting the warmth and intensity wrap around him like armor. Forever, he whispered, a promise of trust, surrender, and love. Forever, Jimin echoed, voice soft, intimate, fierce, as if saying it could shape reality itself. His arms tightened around Jungkook, holding him close, steady, unyielding. And in that quiet, electric moment on the rooftop, beneath the neon glow and the remnants of rain, they didn't need words beyond that. No cliffhanger, no unresolved tension, just two hearts beating in perfect, untamed synchrony, bound by trust, desire, and an unspoken vow to face everything together. The night held them, the city watched silently, and the story, for now, ended in the most exquisite surrender, the fierce, tender, undeniable love that neither could deny, and neither would ever let go.